On my 35th birthday, my grandmother slipped a folded check for $200,000 into my hand. Minutes later, my perfect wealthy husband locked our bedroom door and screamed at me to hand it over. When I refused, he struck me across the face. He threatened to have me arrested, claiming I stole from his clients. I barely escaped with my life. When I took that check to my private bank, the manager looked at the computer screen, lost all the color in his face, and begged me to call the police. The money was not a gift, it was a death sentence. My name is Naomi. I am 35 years old and still healing from wounds my family inflicted. Growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut meant privilege to outsiders. But inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our house with its manicured lawn was a fortress of expectations I could never meet. My childhood bedroom became my sanctuary and prison. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight A's. As a successful software developer, I eventually escaped their toxicity, moving to Atlanta, Georgia, to build a new life and marrying a man I thought was my savior. I thought I had left the manipulation behind, but I merely traded one golden cage for another. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a partner who underestimated your worth. Now let me tell you how my picture-perfect marriage turned into a nightmare in a matter of seconds. The heavy oak door of our master bedroom slammed shut with a force that rattled the picture frames on the walls. The metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place sounded unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Just moments ago downstairs, we had been hosting my milestone birthday party. Dozens of Atlanta's most elite business owners, socialites, and church leaders were sipping champagne in our living room, celebrating the decade-long union between me and my husband, Darren. Darren was a highly respected wealth manager, a pillar of the community, and the man everyone admired. Downstairs, his charismatic smile had dazzled the crowd. But up here, isolated from our guests, that smile had completely vanished. His eyes vibrated with unhinged rage. He marched toward me, his suit looking less like a symbol of success and more like armor. "Hand it over, Naomi," he demanded, his voice dropping to a guttural whisper. "Hand over the check Nana Josephine gave you." My grandmother had pulled me aside and slipped a folded piece of paper into my bag, whispering that I needed to keep it safe. I had no idea Darren had been watching. I backed away, my heels sinking into the carpet. "Why do you care about a birthday gift from my grandmother?" I asked, trembling. "You manage millions for your clients. Why are you desperate for her money?" Darren did not answer. He closed the distance between us. Before I could raise my hands, his hand lashed out. The sharp slap echoed through the bedroom, knocking my head to the side. The impact sent me stumbling backward into the nightstand. My cheek burned with blinding pain, and the metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. The man who prayed beside me every Sunday had just struck me across the face. "You stupid, ungrateful woman," Darren hissed, standing over me as I clutched my face. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out his cell phone, holding it up like a weapon. "Do you have any idea what is at stake right now? You are going to open that purse and hand over the $200,000, or I am dialing the police right now." I stared up at him in shock. "The police," I managed to say, my vision swimming. "For what?" Darren let out a cold laugh that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "I am going to tell them you have been embezzling funds from my clients," he sneered, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. "I will tell them you used your software engineering skills to hack into my firm's database, wire money to offshore accounts, and steal from the very people drinking champagne right now. Who do you think they are going to believe, Naomi? The deeply respected financial advisor who sits on the charity board, or his unstable wife who just got caught trying to run away with a stolen check? Hand it over. Now." Panic flooded my veins. He was threatening to destroy my freedom and my life. If I gave him that check, I would never make it out of this house alive. He would silence me permanently to cover whatever lie he was hiding. My eyes darted around, searching for a way out. My gaze landed on the heavy crystal vase sitting on the nightstand. Survival instinct took over. I grabbed the vase and swung it with everything I had. It smashed into the edge of the nightstand, sending water and petals flying. Armed with a jagged shard of thick crystal, I thrust my arm forward, pointing the broken edge at his throat. "Get back!" I screamed, my voice tearing through my throat. Darren stumbled backward, his eyes widening in shock. He had expected me to cower like I always did when he raised his voice. Taking advantage of his hesitation, I lunged for the door. I threw the deadbolt open, yanked the handle, and sprinted into the hallway. I kicked off my high heels and ran barefoot down the corridor to the back staircase. "Get back here!" Darren roared, his heavy footsteps thundering behind me. I scrambled down the wooden stairs, my bare feet slipping, but caught the handrail. I burst through the fire door into the garage. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely press the unlock button on my key fob. I threw myself into the driver's seat of my Range Rover, slammed the door, and hit the ignition. The engine roared to life. Through the windshield, I saw the heavy oak door to the house fly open. Darren charged into the garage, his face contorted in fury. He threw his body against the hood of my car, pounding his heavy fists against the glass windshield. I did not care. I threw the car into reverse and slammed my foot on the gas pedal. The tires screeched against the concrete as I tore out of the driveway, ignoring the valet drivers and party guests outside our front gates in shock. As I sped through the streets of Atlanta, my heart hammered violently. My cheek was throbbing from where he had hit me. While the scenery blurred, my perfect 10-year marriage flashed before my eyes. We had been the envy of everyone in Buckhead. The opulent charity galas and glowing magazine covers portraying us as a powerful, successful Black couple were all a meticulously crafted illusion. Behind the designer clothes, Darren had been systematically tightening his control over my life, suggesting I cut back my hours at my software firm, isolating me from colleagues, gaslighting me whenever I noticed discrepancies in our joint bank accounts, telling me I simply did not understand complex wealth management strategies. I had traded the emotional coldness of my childhood home for a gilded cage in Georgia. And now the cage door had blown wide open. I glanced down at my evening bag sitting on the passenger seat. The check from Nana Josephine was still safely tucked inside. I needed to secure it immediately before he could make good on his threat to freeze my accounts or call the police. I navigated through the bustling streets of the financial district, pulling up to my private bank. I marched through those double-glass doors barefoot, wearing an evening gown, with a rapidly bruising face and wild hair. I walked straight past the tellers into the office of my branch manager, Mr. Sterling. I slammed the door shut behind me, pulled the folded check from my purse, and threw it onto his desk. "I need this deposited into an isolated independent account right now," I demanded. Mr. Sterling looked at my bruised face in alarm, but his training took over. He picked up the check, adjusted his glasses, and typed the routing numbers into his terminal. I watched his face closely, waiting for the transaction to clear. Instead, the color drained entirely from his face. His hands began to shake violently over his keyboard. He looked at the computer screen, then looked up at me, his eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. He slowly stood up from his chair, walked over to his office window, and pulled the blinds tightly shut. He locked the office door and turned back to me, his voice trembling as he spoke. "Ma'am," he whispered, looking around as if the walls were listening, "please call the police immediately. This money is not a gift." Section 2. 1,500 words. The air in Mr. Sterling's office suddenly felt heavy and suffocating. The polished mahogany walls and plush leather chairs no longer represented the safety and discretion I had relied on for years. They felt like the walls of an interrogation room. "What are you talking about?" I asked. My voice sounded hollow, barely recognizable to my own ears. "I just need you to deposit it into a secure account. Please just do the transaction." Mr. Sterling did not touch the keyboard again. He took a staggering step backward, bumping into his tall metal filing cabinet. His breathing grew shallow and rapid. He stared at the check on his desk as if it were a live grenade ready to detonate. "Naomi, you do not understand," he said, his voice cracking under the immense strain. "I cannot deposit this check. I cannot even touch it again. I need you to understand the absolute danger you are in right now." He rushed back to his desk and turned his large computer monitor slightly so I could clearly see the screen. Lines of code and complex financial routing numbers flashed in harsh white text against a dark background. I squinted, trying to make sense of the rapidly scrolling data. My professional background in software engineering allowed me to easily decipher basic financial encryption. But the layers of proxy servers and international shell company designations listed on the screen before me were staggering. The complexity of the digital architecture was highly deliberate. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths and spent a vast fortune to hide the true origin of these funds. Look at the routing sequence, Mr. Sterling instructed, pointing a trembling index finger at a specific string of digits. This is not a standard domestic transfer. This check is drawn directly from an offshore trust account registered in the Cayman Islands. A trust account that flagged every single security protocol our international bank utilizes the very moment I entered the sequence. I shook my head, the dull throbbing pain in my bruised cheek momentarily forgotten. That is impossible, I argued. Nana Josephine is a retired accountant. She lives quietly on a modest pension and her accumulated life savings. She gave me this specific check at my birthday party downstairs less than an hour ago. She told me to keep it safe. Why would my elderly grandmother have access to a heavily encrypted offshore account? Because she did not open the account, Naomi, Mr. Sterling said gravely. You did. I gripped the polished edge of his desk to physically steady myself. No. I have never opened an offshore account in my life. I run a highly respected local software firm. All my business assets and personal accounts are strictly domestic. According to classified international banking records, you are the sole primary beneficiary and acting director of a massive shell corporation called Vanguard Holdings. Mr. Sterling explained, tapping another key to pull up a completely different screen. The corporate charter bears your exact digital signature, your personal social security number, and your private biometric verification data. And this specific check your grandmother handed to you is a direct withdrawal from that exact corporate entity. The pieces of the terrifying puzzle began rapidly colliding in my mind, forming a crystal clear and horrifying picture. My grandmother had spent 40 highly successful years working as a forensic accountant. She possessed a brilliant mind like a steel trap and an uncanny ability to spot hidden financial inconsistencies. She had never fully trusted Darren. She always warned me that his charismatic smile never truly reached his eyes, and his massive financial success seemed far too rapid and entirely too seamless. While I was downstairs graciously greeting elite guests and cutting my birthday cake, Nana Josephine must have quietly slipped away upstairs. She must have used her old professional skills to crack the code and break into Darren's hidden home office safe. She found the absolute truth, and she used this physical check as the only guaranteed way to warn me without alerting him to her discovery. How much money is currently sitting in that offshore account? I demanded, my voice dropping to a harsh, desperate whisper. Mr. Sterling swallowed hard, wiping sweat from his forehead. The current available balance is exactly zero. But the detailed transaction history clearly shows that over the past 4 years, more than $15 million has funneled directly through this specific trust. $15 million. The impossible number echoed loudly in my mind. Darren was a highly sought-after wealth manager for some of the most prominent affluent families in all of Atlanta. He personally handled retirement funds, large investment portfolios, and massive generational wealth for people who trusted him implicitly with their futures. He stood confidently at the pulpit of our church every Sunday and preached loudly about honest financial stewardship. He is running a massive Ponzi scheme. I realized the sheer horror of the situation washing over my entire body like freezing ice water. He is not investing their hard-earned money. He is blatantly stealing it. He uses funds from brand new investors to pay out fake returns to the older ones. And he is methodically funneling the stolen capital straight through this offshore trust. Mr. Sterling nodded slowly, his expression incredibly grim, and he deliberately set you up to take the absolute fall. The entire room suddenly began to spin around me. I remembered all those late nights Darren casually asked me to sign massive stacks of routine tax documents. All those times he aggressively insisted on handling my personal business filings, claiming he just wanted to save me the administrative headache so I could entirely focus on my software development. He had never been trying to help me. He had been meticulously building an enormous paper trail that pointed directly and exclusively to me. He had maliciously weaponized my clean identity. If the federal authorities ever suddenly audited his firm, they would find a perfectly clean, spotless operation on his end. All the missing $15 million would trace back effortlessly to Vanguard Holdings, to me. That is precisely why he violently locked the bedroom door, I said, my breath catching painfully in my dry throat. That is exactly why he was so incredibly desperate to get the paper check back. If I deposited it securely here, the global banking system would automatically flag the offshore account and alert the authorities to the hidden existence of Vanguard Holdings. Nana Josephine brilliantly forced his hand. She intentionally triggered the hidden alarm. "We have to call the Federal Bureau of Investigation right now," Mr. Sterling said frantically, reaching for his heavy desk phone. "We have to officially report this immediately, Naomi. You are currently looking at decades in a federal prison for severe wire fraud and massive money laundering if you do not instantly get ahead of this false narrative. They will ruthlessly seize your company, your personal assets, and your freedom." "Wait!" I commanded, forcefully slamming my hand down hard on his phone to stop him. "Do not call anyone yet. If Darren realizes the federal authorities are onto him, he will rapidly destroy the digital evidence. He has immense resources. He has powerful connections with corrupt local judges and politicians. If we move too soon, he will simply slip away and leave me completely holding the bag. I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with first. Check our joint domestic accounts. I want to vividly see everything he has done in the past 48 hours. Mr. Sterling pulled up our joint accounts, revealing columns of shifting numbers that made my blood run cold. "I do not understand," he murmured, squinting closely at the monitor. "Your primary savings account and your joint checking are empty." "What do you mean empty?" I asked, rushing around behind his desk to look at the screen. "He liquidated everything," Mr. Sterling said, his voice barely audible above the computer. "As of late yesterday afternoon, Darren quickly initiated a complex series of rapid wire transfers, moving every single dollar out of your domestic joint accounts. You have zero financial liquidity, Naomi." A heavy wave of intense nausea hit me. But why deliberately drain them yesterday? I wondered aloud, staring deeply at the empty balances. He did not know Nana Josephine was going to expose him yet. Mr. Sterling continued scrolling through the transaction logs, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. "There is one outgoing payment that was processed immediately after the accounts were drained," he noted. "A premium payment for a new insurance policy." He clicked on the transaction, expanding the details. "The policy was activated precisely 24 hours ago. It is a premium term life insurance policy, Naomi. The total payout is exactly $5 million. You are the insured party, and Darren is listed as the sole beneficiary." "He wants me dead," I whispered, stating the chilling reality out loud. "He intends to kill me, collect the money, and disappear." The cold truth hung in the air of the bank manager office. Calling the local authorities was not an option. Darren played golf with the chief of police every second Sunday. He funded the mayoral campaigns and hosted exclusive charity dinners for the local judges. If I walked into an Atlanta precinct to report him, Darren would receive a phone call before I even finished writing my initial statement. He would twist the narrative, playing the concerned husband dealing with a hysterical, mentally unstable wife. I would be locked away in a psychiatric ward, or worse, I would suffer a tragic fatal accident on my way home. I thanked Mr. Sterling for his help, instructing him to freeze any activity on my personal accounts without raising suspicion. I walked back out into the blinding Georgia sunlight, my mind racing with terrifying clarity. I climbed back into my car, checking my rearview mirror obsessively. Every black Suburban or unmarked vehicle seemed like a potential threat. I needed a sanctuary. I needed the one person who saw through his charming facade from the very beginning. I drove out of the city limits, heading toward the quiet, wealthy suburbs where my grandmother lived. Nana Josephine resided in a heavily gated estate guarded by high stone walls and a state-of-the-art security system. As I approached the wrought iron gates, my hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The security camera scanned my license plate, and the heavy gates slowly swung open. I parked the car and rushed to the solid oak front door. Nana Josephine opened it before I even had the chance to knock. She did not look like an elderly woman who had just fled a chaotic birthday party. She stood tall, impeccably dressed in her tailored suit, her sharp eyes taking in my bruised cheek and disheveled appearance. She did not offer me a comforting hug or meaningless words of sympathy. She simply stepped aside and motioned for me to follow her down the long hallway. We entered her private study, a room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and smelling faintly of old paper and Earl Grey tea. She walked directly to her heavy mahogany desk and gestured for me to sit. In the center of the desk sat a thick red file folder. It looked ominous, stark against the dark wood. "I knew you would figure it out quickly, Naomi," she said, taking a seat across from me. "When I cracked his home office safe during the party, I expected to find evidence of infidelity or hidden assets. What I found was a financial massacre. He is bleeding out, and he is trying to take you down with him." She opened the thick red file and pushed a stack of heavily highlighted documents toward me. The grandmother who used to bake me cookies had been replaced by the ruthless forensic accountant who spent 40 years tearing apart the financial lies of corrupt corporations. She pulled no punches. She laid out the meticulous paper trail detailing every single transaction Darren had hidden from me. "Look at these vendor payments," she commanded, tapping a manicured finger against a spreadsheet. "He has not just been running a Ponzi scheme with his elite clients. He has been systematically bleeding your software firm dry for the past 2 years." I leaned forward, staring at the highlighted rows of data. My company utilized numerous third-party contractors for cloud hosting and server maintenance. Darren had insisted on managing the accounts payable department to free up my time for software development. The documents in the red file revealed a network of shadow accounts and fake vendor invoices. Darren had been inflating consulting fees and authorizing massive payments to offshore shell companies. He was siphoning capital directly from your operational budget to cover the massive interest payments of his collapsing Ponzi scheme, Nana Josephine explained, her voice clinical and precise. His early investors were demanding their promised returns. Without new capital flowing in fast enough, he turned to your company. He used your hard-earned revenue to keep his fraudulent empire afloat. And when the money from your firm was not enough, he drained your personal joint accounts yesterday. The sheer scale of his betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I stared at the forged signatures on the fake invoices. Every single document bore my digital signature. He had completely insulated himself while tying the noose tightly around my neck. The emotional shift happened rapidly, tearing through the 5 stages of grief in record time. First came denial. I frantically flipped through the pages, searching for a mistake, a clerical error, anything that could prove my husband of 10 years was not a monster. I wanted to believe there was a logical explanation, but the numbers did not lie and my grandmother never made mistakes. Then came anger. A hot, searing fury boiled up from the pit of my stomach. I grabbed a crystal paperweight from her desk and hurled it across the room. It smashed into the stone fireplace, shattering into 100 pieces. I wanted to scream, to tear down the walls, to inflict the same amount of pain he had caused me. He had smiled in my face, kissed me goodnight, and secretly plotted my financial and physical demise. Bargaining quickly followed. I wondered if I could just run away. I could take my car, drive across the country, change my name, and start over somewhere new. Maybe if I disappeared, Darren would collect his stolen money and leave me alone. But the reality of the $5 million life insurance policy crushed that brief hope. I was worth infinitely more to him dead than alive or missing. He would hunt me down. Depression settled over me next, a crushing, suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. A decade of my life was a complete illusion. Every shared memory, every vacation, every whispered promise in the dark was a calculated transaction. He had never loved me. I was simply a resource, an asset to be drained and discarded when it ceased to be profitable. I buried my face in my hands, the tears finally spilling over. I cried for the woman I was yesterday, an oblivious, happy wife celebrating her 35th birthday. That woman was dead now, and from her ashes came acceptance. The tears stopped abruptly. I wiped my face, my skin feeling tight and hot. The overwhelming devastation hardened, morphing into a cold, terrifying, and highly calculated rage. I looked up at Nana Josephine. She was watching me closely, waiting for the storm to pass and the steel to emerge. I refuse to be his victim, I said, my voice dangerously steady. I built my company from nothing. I worked 80-hour weeks sacrificing my youth to create software that changed the industry. I will not let him take my company. I will not let him destroy my reputation. And I absolutely will not let him take my life. Nana Josephine smiled, a sharp, predatory expression that mirrored my own internal fury. That is the granddaughter I raised, she said, leaning back in her chair. Divorcing him is a death sentence. Turning him over to the local authorities is a death sentence. He has too much power and you have a massive target on your back. We cannot just expose him, I agreed, staring at the red file. If we corner him without a flawless plan, he will panic and strike. He knows the local judges. He has the police chief on speed dial. We need something infinitely bigger than a local scandal. We need a trap so airtight and so completely devastating that he never sees it coming until the steel bars slam shut behind him. We need federal intervention, Nana Josephine stated, pulling a separate slim black folder from her desk drawer. Local corruption cannot protect him from the federal government, but the authorities will require absolute proof. They need irrefutable insider evidence to build a racketeering case. We have to give them the smoking gun. I stood up, pacing the length of the study. My mind shifted from a grieving wife to a strategic engineer analyzing a complex system failure. Darren thought I was a naive, easily manipulated woman. He relied on my submission. He expected me to cower, to act irrationally, or to flee in panic. I would use his arrogant assumptions against him. I have to go back to the house, I said, turning to face her. I have to play the role of the terrified, obedient wife. If I stay away too long, he will assume I know everything, and he will accelerate his timeline. I need to be close to him to gather the final pieces of evidence we need. It is incredibly dangerous, Naomi. Nana Josephine warned, her sharp eyes softening with genuine concern. You will be sleeping next to a man who actively wants you dead. You will have to look him in the eye and smile while knowing he holds the knife behind his back. Can you mask your disgust long enough to trap him? I touched the bruised swelling on my cheek. The physical pain grounded me, anchoring my resolve. He taught me exactly how to wear a mask, I replied coldly. I spent 10 years playing the perfect supportive wife in front of Atlanta society. I can play the role one last time to ensure he spends the rest of his life rotting in a federal prison cell. We spent the next several hours meticulously reviewing every document in the red file. We mapped out his entire fraudulent network, tracking the money flow from his elite clients through my company and into the offshore shell corporations. Every piece of data was a weapon, and I intended to sharpen them all. We identified the gaps in the paper trail, the missing links that only someone living in his house could access. He thinks he is the smartest person in the room, I said, closing the red file. He thinks his charm and his money make him invincible. But he made one critical miscalculation. He underestimated me. Nana Josephine locked the files back in her secure drawer. We will burn his entire empire to the ground, she stated fiercely. But we cannot do this alone. I have an old contact from my accounting days, a special agent who owes me a favor. We are going to bring the Federal Bureau of Investigation right to his front door. I took a deep breath, letting the reality of my new mission settle over me. The opulent mansion I had called home for a decade would now become my battlefield. Every conversation would be a calculated maneuver, every shared meal a tactical engagement. I had to suppress my rising revulsion and embrace the cold logic of survival. Darren had unknowingly ignited a fire within me, a blazing inferno of vengeance that would not be extinguished until justice was fully served. I looked out the study window at the gathering dusk, preparing myself for the longest night of my life. The deadly game of survival had officially begun, and I fully intended to win. The night air was thick and humid as Nana Josephine drove us away from her heavily guarded estate. She had instructed me to leave my phone and smartwatch behind, ensuring we could not be tracked. We navigated through the winding suburban roads until the grand mansions gave way to industrial zoning. We pulled into the dimly lit parking garage of a defunct shopping mall. The concrete structure felt like a tomb, echoing with the faint sound of distant highway traffic. A plain gray sedan idled in the darkest corner of the lowest level. A man stepped out into the shadows. He wore a nondescript dark suit and possessed the sharp, calculating gaze of a predator accustomed to hunting in the corporate jungle. Nana Josephine killed the engine and stepped out of the car. I followed closely behind her, my bare feet now shoved into a pair of her oversized driving loafers. Naomi, this is Special Agent Marcus Davis from the White Collar Crime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, she said by way of introduction. He is one of the few men in this city who cannot be bought by your husband. Davis offered a curt professional nod today. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small, secure flashlight. Josephine told me we had a massive problem, he said, his voice a low rumble that barely carried over the concrete walls. I did not expect the problem to look like an assaulted wife in a torn evening gown. Hand him the file, I instructed my grandmother. She handed over the thick red folder containing the meticulous breakdown of Darren and his offshore shell corporations. Agent Davis clicked on his flashlight and began rapidly scanning the highlighted documents. His eyes widened slightly as he absorbed the data there. He closed the folder with a sharp snap. We have been actively tracking your husband for 8 agonizing months, he revealed, looking directly into my eyes. We mapped out the sudden influx of unaccounted wealth pouring through his elite management firm. We suspected he was running a massive Ponzi scheme using his high society church connections to lure in wealthy marks. The problem is, Darren is a digital ghost. He insulates himself behind layers of proxy servers and high-paid local politicians. Every time we attempt to subpoena his digital records, a local corrupt judge actively blocks our federal requests. We desperately needed an insider. Agent Davis continued pacing a tight circle around our parked car. We needed someone with direct physical access to his home office network. We knew about Vanguard Holdings, but we lacked the final piece of irrefutable evidence connecting him to the stolen $15 million. And now, because of this life insurance policy, the clock is ticking faster than we ever anticipated. To secure a federal indictment under the Racketeer, Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, we need his encrypted ledger. We believe he uses a hidden burner phone to authorize the massive offshore transfers today. Without that specific physical device, any skilled defense attorney will claim you are the sole mastermind behind the fraud, he explained gravely. The forged signatures on the vendor invoices point entirely to you, Naomi. We need to catch him in the act of commanding those illicit funds. I crossed my arms against the chilling breeze blowing through the parking garage. How much time do you need to secure the federal warrants and freeze his global assets? I asked firmly. Agent Davis leaned against the hood of his sedan, crossing his arms. I need exactly 72 hours, he stated loudly. It takes an immense amount of bureaucratic coordination to synchronize a global asset freeze across multiple international banking jurisdictions, he explained. If we miss even one offshore account, he will instantly wire the stolen money to a non-extradition country and vanish forever. I need 72 hours of absolute silence. If Darren even suspects we are watching him, he will liquidate the remaining funds, execute his exit strategy, and undoubtedly finalize his plan to murder you. I looked at Nana Josephine, who stared back with deep apprehension. I will give you your 72 hours, I declared very resolutely. Both Agent Davis and my grandmother immediately protested. It is a suicide mission, Nana Josephine argued, gripping my arm tightly. You cannot go back to that house. You just threatened him with a broken crystal vase and fled. He will be on high alert, waiting to snap your neck the second you step through the front door. I gently pulled my arm away from her grasp. He expects me to be terrified, I countered. He expects me to run away and hide. But he also thinks I am weak, submissive, and completely dependent on his immense wealth and vast power. I will weaponize his massive ego against him. I continued, feeling the cold steel of determination harden within my chest. I will go back and play the role of the foolish, battered wife who panicked and came crawling back to her savior. I will tell him I lost the birthday check in my frantic escape and beg for his forgiveness. Agent Davis studied my face, weighing the immense danger against the unprecedented opportunity. It is incredibly risky, he warned. If you make one wrong move or break character for a single second, you will not survive the long dark night. I am already a dead woman if we do not trap him, I reminded the federal agent. Equip me. Give me whatever surveillance technology you have. I will find that hidden burner phone, and I will hand you his entire criminal empire on a silver platter. Agent Davis nodded slowly, making his final decision. He walked to the trunk of his sedan and opened a reinforced black tactical case. He pulled out a small, sleek metallic box. Inside rested an array of highly advanced microscopic surveillance equipment. "We are going to wire your entire daily life," he stated, opening it. He handed me a tiny adhesive disc, no larger than a grain of rice. "This is a high-definition audio transmitter," he explained. "We will embed one in the lining of your handbag and another inside the collar of the coat you wear. They broadcast on an encrypted military frequency directly to our surveillance vans. We will park a discreet utility truck 3 blocks from your mansion to monitor every single word spoken inside those walls." He pulled out a secondary device, a flat magnetic square. "This is a real-time global positioning tracker for your vehicle," he continued softly. "I will attach it beneath the rear bumper of your Range Rover before you drive back home," he said. "If your car moves an inch off its usual route, we will know instantly. Next, we need to discuss your behavior. You cannot show anger. You cannot show defiance. You must shrink yourself into the victim he believes you are." I closed my eyes and visualized the charismatic monster waiting for me in Buckhead. I mentally packed away my pride, my corporate authority, and my burning rage. I needed to channel the frightened woman who cowered helplessly against the bedroom wall. "Let us practice," Agent Davis ordered, stepping into my personal space to simulate daring, physical intimidation. "Look at me. Tell me why you ran away." My heart hammered, but I forced my shoulders to slump. I lowered my gaze to his shoes, letting my voice tremble just enough to sound authentic. "I was scared," I whispered, bringing a shaking hand to the dark purple bruise blooming across my cheekbone. "You hurt me, and I panicked. I drove around for hours crying. I dropped my evening bag at a gas station and lost the check. Please do not hurt me again." Nana Josephine exhaled a sharp breath, visibly shaken by the terrifying accuracy of my performance. Agent Davis stepped back, offering a grim nod of approval. "Your bruise will sell the story perfectly," he noted, analyzing my face. "Do not try to cover it with makeup. Let him see the physical damage he inflicted. It will feed his narcissistic superiority complex and make him drop his guard. He believes physical violence guarantees absolute submission. Use that toxic arrogance to build your cover. You must be his perfect, adoring victim for exactly 3 days. Can you maintain that horrific facade, Naomi, today?" I looked at my reflection in the dark-tinted window of the sedan. The woman staring back at me looked battered, broken, and entirely defeated. But beneath the surface, a lethal, calculating predator waited silently in the shadows. I can maintain the illusion, I promised, meeting the agent eyes with absolute conviction. "He wants to play a game of life and death, but he does not realize I am writing the final rules." Agent Davis closed the tactical case and secured the trunk. "Good luck, Naomi," he murmured. "The 72-hour countdown begins the moment you walk inside tonight." The drive back to Buckhead felt like navigating my own funeral procession. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, but I forced myself to focus entirely on the performance ahead. I pulled my Range Rover into the expansive circular driveway of our mansion. The caterers and valet drivers were long gone, leaving the manicured grounds eerily silent. The massive crystal chandelier glowed through the grand foyer windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the imported marble steps. I stepped out of the vehicle carrying my shoes and let my shoulders slump forward. I took a deep, trembling breath to center my racing heart. I was no longer a CEO. I was a broken, terrified wife. I pushed open the heavy mahogany front door and stepped into the grand entryway. The house was immaculately clean, the remnants of my birthday party completely erased by the household staff. Darren was pacing furiously in the center of the formal living room. His tuxedo jacket was discarded on a velvet armchair, and his bow tie hung loosely around his neck. He held a crystal tumbler filled with amber liquor, and the ice clinked sharply as he spun around to face me. His jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle ticked visibly in his cheek. His dark eyes locked onto my bruised face, and for a split second, I saw the lethal predator hiding beneath his polished exterior. "Where have you been?" he demanded, his voice deceptively low and dangerously calm. He set the glass down on the mantel and took a slow, calculated step toward me. I immediately shrank back against the heavy wooden door, allowing a genuine sob to tear from my throat. I brought a trembling hand to my face, letting the tears spill over my eyelashes and stream down my cheeks. The sting of my bruised cheekbone made the crying incredibly authentic. I was so scared I whimpered, letting my voice crack and break. I just drove around the city for hours crying and shaking. I did not know what to do, Darren. I was so terrified you were going to hurt me again. His aggressive posture faltered slightly as he analyzed my pathetic demeanor. He took another step forward, his gaze sweeping over my ruined evening gown and my bare, dirty feet. "Where's the check, Naomi?" he asked, the underlying tension still pulling his words tight. "Give it to me right now." I collapsed to my knees on the cold marble floor, burying my face in my hands and sobbing hysterically. I lost it. I cried, rocking back and forth in feigned agony. I stopped at a gas station somewhere on the highway because I could not stop hyperventilating. I dropped my evening bag by the trash cans while I was trying to find my keys. When I drove away, I realized it was gone. I went back to look for it, but the bag was missing. "The check is gone, Darren. It is completely gone. I am so sorry. I was just so panicked and overwhelmed by the business and the party. Please do not be angry with me." Darren stared down at me in absolute silence. The seconds stretched into an eternity as his calculating mind processed my frantic confession. I kept my head bowed, silently praying to God that my performance was convincing enough to satisfy his massive ego. He needed to believe I was a clumsy, hysterical fool who ruined a simple financial transaction out of sheer incompetence. Slowly, the heavy tension drained from the room. I heard him exhale a long, slow breath. He knelt onto the marble floor beside me. His large hands reached out and gently grasped my shaking shoulders, pulling me upward. He wrapped his arms tightly around me, pulling my body against his chest. "It is okay, Naomi," he murmured, his voice suddenly dripping with a sickeningly sweet fabricated warmth. "It is okay, baby. I am not angry anymore. Shh, stop crying now, I have you." I had to mentally dissociate to prevent myself from violently vomiting all over his expensive tailored shirt. The smell of his signature sandalwood cologne, mixed with the sharp scent of bourbon, made my stomach churn with absolute revulsion. This was the man who had just purchased a $5 million policy on my life. This was the man actively plotting my impending murder. Yet he stroked my hair with tender affection, playing the role of the protective provider with chilling ease. "I am so sorry I hit you," he whispered, pressing his lips softly against my forehead. "You know I would never intentionally hurt you, right? It is just the work stress. The market has been incredibly volatile, and my wealthiest clients have been demanding impossible returns. The pressure has been destroying my mental health lately. When you hesitated with that check, I just snapped. I felt like my own wife did not trust me. You know everything I do is for our future, right? I am going to make this up to you. I promise." I nodded meekly, burying my face against his collarbone to hide the absolute disgust radiating from my eyes. "I know," I whispered back, forcing my voice to sound muffled and compliant. "I love you, Darren. I am so sorry I ruined the party." He pulled back and offered a sad, practiced smile, reaching up to gently trace the perimeter of my bruised cheek. "You did not ruin anything beautiful," he said smoothly. "We will figure out the money later. Right now, you need to rest. Take a hot bath and get some sleep. I actually have an urgent client dinner I need to attend tonight. One of my largest investors is threatening to pull his accounts because of the current market fluctuations. I need to go smooth things over and do some aggressive damage control." He stood up, brushing the invisible dust from his trousers, and reached for his tuxedo jacket. The lie slipped from his tongue with flawless precision. He was not going to meet a concerned investor. He was going out to coordinate the final stages of his massive money laundering operation and likely finalize the details of my execution. "I will be back late," he said, checking his luxury wristwatch. "Do not wait up for me. Get some rest, baby." I watched from the living room sofa as he walked out the front door, closing it firmly behind him. I sat perfectly still, counting the seconds until I heard the distinct roar of his sports car engine firing up in the driveway. I listened intently as the tires crunched over the gravel and the heavy iron gates opened and closed. The moment the sound of his engine completely faded into the distance, the fragile weeping victim vanished. My spine straightened, and a cold surge of adrenaline flooded my system. The clock was ticking, and I had work to do. I moved through the massive house with silent, lethal purpose. I bypassed the grand staircase and headed straight down the eastern corridor toward Darren's private home office. He always kept this specific room locked, forbidding me or the household staff from ever entering under the strict guise of client confidentiality. The heavy oak door was secured with a sophisticated biometric keypad and a secondary magnetic card reader. I reached into the hidden lining of my dress and pulled out the cloned keycard Nana Josephine had crafted for me. She had secretly skimmed his wallet during a family dinner 2 months ago, preparing for the exact moment we would need to breach his fortress. I swiped the blank white card through the magnetic reader. The scanner beeped a soft green tone, and the heavy internal locking mechanism clicked open. I slipped inside and quietly pushed the door shut behind me, plunging the room into darkness. I did not dare turn on the overhead lights, knowing the bright glow might alert the neighborhood security patrols passing by the estate. Instead, I pulled a small pen light from my pocket, casting a narrow, focused beam across the room. The office was meticulously organized, reflecting his obsessive need for absolute control. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the space, flanked by towering leather-bound bookshelves and a vintage globe bar. Against the far wall sat a heavy steel biometric safe bolted directly into the concrete foundation. I knew the physical documents linking me to the fraudulent offshore accounts were secured inside that steel box, but I was not here for the paperwork tonight. The federal agents explicitly needed the digital command center. I needed to find his hidden burner phone. I began a systematic teardown of the room, starting with the most obvious hiding places. I checked the deep drawers of his mahogany desk, running my hands along the undersides, searching for taped compartments or false bottoms. I found nothing but expensive stationery and client portfolios. I moved to the bookshelves, meticulously pulling out heavy volumes of tax law and financial regulations, checking the hollow spaces behind the bindings. The minutes ticked by with agonizing speed. My heart pounded relentlessly against my ribs, a deafening drumbeat of anxiety. If Darren had forgotten a file or decided to cancel his dinner, I would be caught red-handed in his sanctuary. I dropped to my knees and checked the baseboards, running my fingertips along the wooden trim. Empty. I checked the plush leather seating, lifting the heavy cushions and digging into the deep crevices. Nothing. Panic began to claw at the edges of my rational mind. Agent Davis had been absolutely certain the device was kept securely in this house. Darren was far too paranoid to carry a digital ledger containing a $15 million confession on his person. I stood in the center of the room, shining the narrow beam of my penlight over the remaining furniture. My gaze swept past the desk, the bookshelves, the safe, and finally landed on the vintage globe bar sitting near the leather armchair. On top of the globe rested a large, beautifully carved wooden humidor where Darren kept his collection of imported cigars. He rarely smoked, preferring the aesthetic appeal of the expensive cigars over the actual habit. I walked over to the globe and carefully lifted the heavy wooden lid of the humidor. The rich, pungent scent of aged tobacco filled the air. Several expensive cigars lay perfectly aligned on the cedar tray. It looked entirely undisturbed. I gently lifted the top cedar tray, setting it silently on the desk. The bottom compartment appeared equally normal, containing a small humidification device and a few scattered cedar shards. I pressed my fingers firmly against the bottom panel of the wooden box. It felt solid, but when I tapped my knuckles against the corner, the sound echoed with a very faint, hollow resonance. My pulse accelerated. I wedged my fingernails into the tight seam along the edge of the wood and pried upward with all my strength. The false cedar bottom popped loose with a sharp click, revealing a hidden compartment underneath. Nestled securely in the dark, hollow space, held in place by a strip of black electrical tape, lay a cheap, disposable prepaid smartphone. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. My hands shook as I reached down and carefully peeled the tape back, freeing the device. I pressed the small power button on the side of the plastic casing. The screen flared to life, illuminating the dark office with a harsh blue light. It required a simple 4-digit passcode. I did not need to crack the code tonight. I just needed to securely extract the encrypted data. Section 6, 1,500 words. I pulled the specialized USB drive Agent Davis had given me from the concealed pocket of my dress. The small metallic device contained highly classified federal decryption software designed to bypass commercial security protocols. I took a deep breath to steady my trembling hands and plugged the drive directly into the charging port of the burner phone. A tiny green LED light blinked twice, signaling a successful connection. I did not need to manually crack his 4-digit passcode tonight. The federal software instantly bypassed the lock screen, mirroring the entire contents of the device. A hidden application opened automatically on the dark screen, displaying a rapidly filling progress bar. The software was executing a complete forensic extraction, cloning all encrypted messages, offshore banking tokens, and deleted voicemails directly to the secure servers at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Every single byte of data was streaming silently through the encrypted military frequency, bypassing Darren and his corrupt local connections entirely. I crouched on the floor of the dark office, keeping the glow of the screen shielded beneath my body. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the frantic pounding of my heart. I watched the progress bar inch forward, agonizingly slow. As the data compiled, the decryption software generated a live preview cache of the most recent text message threads. The raw files scrolled rapidly across the illuminated screen. I could not stop myself from reading them. The sheer, unadulterated cruelty of the messages completely took my breath away. Darren was not just discussing offshore wire transfers and shell company logistics. He was actively discussing me. He referred to me using vile, degrading terms, calling me a naive workaholic, a useful idiot, and the perfect sacrificial lamb. He mocked my dedication to my software firm, laughing about how easily he siphoned my profits right under my nose. He joked about how my impending death would finally free him. The vicious words sliced through my chest like a jagged knife, but the true devastating gut punch was yet to come. I scrolled up to view the recipient of these horrific messages. A photograph loaded onto the screen. It was an intimate selfie taken in what I immediately recognized as the master suite of a luxury hotel in downtown Atlanta. Darren was lying against the crisp white pillows, his chest bare, and his signature arrogant smirk aimed at the camera. And lying right beside him, her head resting intimately on his shoulder, was Camille. The phone almost slipped from my sweaty hands. Camille. The woman smiling back at me from the illicit photograph was my biological brother David and his beloved wife, my sweet, supportive sister-in-law. The former historically black college and university pageant queen who always played the role of the perfect, nurturing family matriarch. A wave of profound nausea crashed over me so violently I had to press my hand hard against my mouth to stifle a physical gag. She was not just a passing affair. She was his active co-conspirator, his partner in crime, and the woman helping him plot my absolute destruction. The shocking revelation slammed into me violently, recontextualizing the past decade of my life. My mind immediately flashed back to the countless Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings we had shared. I remembered sitting around the large dining table at David and Camille's sprawling suburban home. She always made a grand show of serving Darren the first and largest portion of her famous gumbo, flashing him that sickeningly sweet pageant smile. She would inevitably turn her attention to me, her tone dripping with passive-aggressive condescension, masked as sisterly concern. "Naomi, you really work entirely too hard," she would say loudly enough for the whole family to hear. "You are going to age yourself prematurely staring at those computer screens all day long. A real woman knows how to cater to her husband and keep the romance alive. A man like Darren needs a wife who prioritizes his comfort over some silly little software business." I used to brush off her toxic comments, assuming she was simply a traditional woman who did not understand my modern professional drive. I would politely change the subject while David proudly kissed her cheek, entirely oblivious to the venom hiding behind her flawless makeup. All those years while she sat at my family dining table judging my dedication to my career, she was actively sleeping with my husband. While she publicly shamed me for being a driven professional woman, she was privately conspiring with Darren to steal the very money I was working so desperately to earn. The staggering hypocrisy of her actions filled me with a blinding white-hot rage. She played the devout church-going wife to my brother while orchestrating the largest financial fraud in Atlanta history right beneath our noses. I continued reading the decrypted text messages as the progress bar hit 80%. The conversation threads revealed the sinister mechanics of their massive criminal enterprise. Camille did not just provide a convenient alibi or a secret hotel room. She was the primary mechanism Darren used to wash his stolen millions. For the past 5 years, Camille had been rapidly expanding her chain of luxury beauty salons across the greater Atlanta area. David always bragged about her incredible entrepreneurial success, claiming her salons were thriving because of her brilliant marketing skills and deep community connections. The text messages on the glowing screen told the real horrifying story. Her high-end beauty salons were nothing more than sophisticated front businesses. Darren used her extensive network of cash-heavy storefronts to systematically launder the stolen capital from his Ponzi scheme. He would funnel the dirty money snatched from his elite wealth management clients directly into couture beauty accounts, recording the transactions as massive influxes of fake cash-paying customers. Camille would then process the funds, declaring them as legitimate salon revenue before transferring the clean money into the offshore shell corporations registered under my name. They had built an incredibly efficient, perfectly insulated washing machine. David, my sweet, trusting brother, had absolutely no idea his wife was a high-level money launderer. He thought he was married to a brilliant businesswoman. He was entirely funding her initial locations, helping her secure commercial leases, and proudly supporting her fraudulent empire. She was destroying my life and making a complete fool out of my own flesh and blood. As I read deeper into their sinister exchanges, the full scope of Camille's deeply rooted psychological motivation became sickeningly clear. This was never just about acquiring vast sums of illicit wealth. Her involvement was driven by a dark, festering jealousy that had apparently consumed her for years. She harbored a profound double motive. She did not just want Darren and his stolen millions. She wanted to utterly annihilate the sister-in-law she had always secretly envied. Camille despised the fact that I was a self-made woman who did not rely on her looks or a wealthy husband to build an empire. She hated the respect I commanded in the business world, and she loathed the independent wealth I had generated through my software firm. Her text messages to Darren were laced with pure venomous hatred. She rejoiced in the brilliant cruelty of using my clean name as the fall guy for their financial crimes. I cannot wait to see the look on her arrogant face when the feds raid her pristine little office, Camille texted following a successful offshore transfer. She thinks she is so much smarter than everyone else. Let her rot in federal prison while we sip margaritas in the Caymans. The final set of messages downloaded precisely as the progress bar hit 100% on the dark screen. The screen flashed a bright green confirmation signaling the data extraction was fully complete and securely transmitted to Agent Davis. I carefully unplugged the federal drive and firmly pressed the tape back over the hidden compartment in the humidor, ensuring the false cedar bottom looked entirely undisturbed. I stood up slowly, my muscles stiff from crouching in the dark office. The profound shock of the betrayal had fully evaporated, leaving behind an absolute chilling clarity. My own sister-in-law was the sinister architect of my demise. She had weaponized her position in my family to gain access to my life, my husband, and my finances. She was plotting to murder me, and she was using my brother as a blind shield while she did it. I slipped out of the dark office and secured the heavy oak door behind me, ensuring the biometric lock clicked firmly back into place. As I walked silently back up the grand staircase to the master bedroom, the full weight of the impending war settled onto my shoulders. I was no longer fighting a single manipulative husband. I was battling a highly coordinated two-front assault from inside my own family circle. Camille truly wanted my life, my status, and my destruction. She wanted to watch me lose everything I had built. I walked into the master bathroom and looked at my bruised reflection in the mirror. She thought she had outsmarted the arrogant career woman. She thought she had the perfect foolproof plan to eliminate her greatest source of envy and walk away incredibly rich. But she had made the exact same fatal mistake Darren had made. She underestimated my capacity for ruthless survival. I washed the dried tears from my face and carefully prepared to enter the next phase, knowing the real nightmare was just beginning. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of the master bathroom. I washed my face, letting the cold, freezing water shock my system fully awake. I applied a thin, careful layer of foundation, just enough to make the dark purple bruise on my cheek look authentically tender, but not entirely hidden from plain sight. I desperately needed to look exactly like a terrified woman, holding precariously onto the very frayed edge of her fleeting sanity. I walked quietly downstairs into the sprawling, immaculate chef kitchen. The large house was completely silent. Darren was still sound asleep upstairs, thoroughly exhausted from his mysterious late-night criminal activities. I poured myself a steaming cup of strong black coffee. Suddenly, the front doorbell rang, echoing sharply through the quiet, hollow mansion. I quickly checked the glowing digital security monitor panel mounted on the white wall. Standing confidently on the expansive front porch, holding a large, heavy ceramic pot and wearing a flawless, expensive silk blouse was Camille. My heart hammered fiercely inside my tight chest. The very woman who had spent the last 5 years actively sleeping with my deceitful husband and meticulously plotting my brutal demise was standing right on my front doorstep, flawlessly playing the innocent role of the nurturing, concerned sister-in-law. I took a long, deep breath, discreetly checking the microscopic audio transmitter deeply embedded in the collar of my silk robe. I firmly pressed the intercom button, unlocking the heavy front gates. I slowly opened the door and Camille practically swept inside, instantly filling the grand foyer with the strong aromatic scent of spicy Cajun seasoning and her overwhelmingly expensive floral perfume. "Naomi, you poor sweetheart," she cooed effortlessly, balancing the heavy pot on her hip. She immediately reached out and pulled me into a tight, suffocating embrace. I strongly forced myself to weakly hug her back entirely, suppressing the violent physical urge to brutally shove her out the front door. "Darren actually called me first thing this early morning," Camille explained, her sweet voice dripping with absolute fake sympathy. "He was practically sobbing in tears, Naomi. He honestly told me all about the terrible fight at your birthday party and how you unfortunately had a complete mental breakdown. He is so incredibly deeply worried about your fragile mental health right now. I hurriedly brought you some of my fresh homemade gumbo to help soothe your shattered nerves. You know, good warm food is powerful medicine for the weary soul." I silently led her directly into the spacious kitchen, flawlessly playing the demanding role of the thoroughly exhausted, defeated, submissive wife. I sat heavily and tiredly at the large, cold marble kitchen island, while she arrogantly bustled around, acting exactly as if she proudly owned the entire place. She confidently pulled ceramic bowls from the pristine glass cabinets and smoothly ladled the steaming, savory gumbo with highly practiced ease. Every single movement she made was a calculated assertion of her domestic dominance in my own private home. She pushed a full bowl across the polished marble island toward me and took a comfortable seat on the adjacent bar stool. "Eat up, honey," she urged gently, resting her perfectly manicured soft hand directly over mine. "You look absolutely remarkably dreadful. That dark bruise is terrible, but we both know deep down Darren did not truly mean to deliberately do it." I slowly picked up my silver spoon, taking a small, hesitant bite of the spicy, rich stew. The hidden audio transmitter in my collar was flawlessly capturing every single highly toxic word casually spilling from her lying mouth. "He actually hit me, Camille," I whispered softly, letting my weary voice tremble just enough to sound thoroughly, pathetically broken. "He violently locked the bedroom door and he viciously struck me across the face over a simple, stupid misunderstanding." Camille sighed very heavily, slowly shaking her head with a deeply exaggerated look of profound disappointment. It was not disappointment in his abusive actions. It was clear, calculated disappointment in me. "Naomi, you really have to look at the much bigger picture here," she said, leaning conspicuously closer. "Darren is a highly powerful, successful black man in a demanding city that constantly requires absolute perfection. He is currently under an immense, incredible amount of pressure managing all that wealth and prestige. When great men like him carry the heavy weight of the entire world on their stressed shoulders, they sometimes uncontrollably snap. It is our sacred job as their devoted wives to gracefully provide a soft, safe place for them to land. She took a delicate sip of her dark coffee, her sharp dark eyes locking entirely onto mine with chilling, unwavering intensity. You push him entirely too hard, Naomi. You are always so selfishly focused on your software company and constantly acting like you are the ultimate boss. You need to be softer. You urgently need to be far more submissive to his daily needs. You absolutely cannot ruin the impeccable, spotless reputation of our respected family over a little trivial marital disagreement. You need to blindly forgive him and fiercely focus on keeping your household firmly intact. A real traditional woman truly knows how to swallow her foolish pride for the greater sake of her sacred marriage. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of her psychological manipulation was utterly staggering. She was actively, confidently gaslighting me into silently accepting violent physical abuse while she was actively, unapologetically sleeping with the very man who ruthlessly inflicted it. I nodded slowly, taking another small spoonful of the warm gumbo. I am just so incredibly tired, Camille, I murmured softly, wiping a fake exhausted tear from my weary eye. I honestly feel like I am completely losing my fragile mind. That is exactly precisely what Darren worriedly said, she replied smoothly, sympathetically patting my hand once again. He genuinely thinks you might really need to see a medical doctor for some strong anxiety medication. You have been acting very strange and extremely paranoid lately. Just calm down and relax, Naomi. Let Darren responsibly handle the heavy lifting. The sudden sound of heavy, familiar footsteps on the grand wooden staircase abruptly interrupted her dangerously toxic monologue. Darren confidently walked into the bright kitchen wearing dark silk pajama pants and a crisp, clean white t-shirt. He purposefully stopped when he saw Camille, his calculated expression flawlessly shifting into an innocent mask of pleasantly surprised relief. Camille, he said smoothly, casually running a hand through his hair. I certainly did not expect to see you over here so incredibly early. I desperately wanted to bring poor Naomi some hot, healing breakfast. Camille happily replied, her deceptive voice artificially raising an entire octave to sound infinitely sweeter. You sounded so incredibly profoundly worried on the telephone this morning, Darren. I simply had to personally come check on my absolute favorite sister-in-law. Darren casually walked over and gently kissed the top of my head, his lips sickeningly lingering near the tender bruise he had maliciously caused. You are an absolute lifesaver, Camille, he said, his hand resting heavily and possessively on my stiff shoulder. I just desperately want my beautiful wife to feel totally safe and perfectly healthy again. I slowly pushed my half-empty bowl away deliberately, letting my weary eyelids heavily droop. The thick gumbo was very heavy, and I knew exactly precisely how to use it to my strategic advantage. I genuinely think the extremely warm food is actually making me quite sleepy, I mumbled softly, letting a wide, exaggerated yawn readily escape my lips. I barely slept at all last night, did all last. I strongly think I need to go upstairs and take a long, deep nap. Darren squeezed my shoulder very affectionately. That is a truly wonderful idea, baby. You go rest. I will happily stay down here and visit with Camille for a little bit before I have to finally log into work. I slowly stood up from the tall stool, tiredly stretching my weary arms. As I carefully gathered my cloth napkin and silver spoon, I deliberately clumsily bumped into the small decorative fruit bowl sitting prominently in the exact center of the marble kitchen island. As Darren and Camille both instinctively looked quickly at the loudly shifting bowl, I swiftly, stealthily slipped a tiny magnetic live microphone straight from my robe pocket. In one absolutely seamless fluid motion, I securely attached the small black disc directly underneath the thick marble overhang of the kitchen island. It instantly clamped silently onto the dark metal support bracket, remaining completely perfectly hidden from any possible view. I quietly walked away from the bright kitchen, effectively leaving them entirely alone. I very slowly climbed the grand sweeping staircase, intentionally making absolute sure my sluggish footsteps were appropriately heavy and clearly audible, so they both knew definitively I was truly gone. The precise moment I securely reached the isolated master bedroom, I firmly closed the heavy oak door and locked it securely. I moved swiftly to my closet, pulling out a small wireless earpiece Agent Davis had provided. I pressed it firmly into my ear and tapped the side to activate the live audio feed transmitting directly from the kitchen island downstairs. I sat on the edge of the large bed, holding my breath. For a few seconds, there was only the faint clinking of silverware. Then I heard the undeniable sound of heavy fabric shifting and the distinct wet noise of two people passionately kissing. The audio was crystal clear, capturing every soft moan and sharp breath. "God, I missed you last night," Darren groaned, his voice thick with raw desire. Playing the apologetic husband is exhausting. Camille let out a low, wicked laugh. She bought the entire performance, Darren. You should have seen her face when I told her she needed to be more submissive to you. She was practically eating out of my hand. The poor girl is completely clueless. She thinks her mind is actually breaking. She is so incredibly naive, Darren scoffed, pouring himself a fresh cup of coffee. She really thinks I am just stressed about the stock market. She has no idea we completely drained her accounts yesterday. We are so close, Camille. Just a few more days and Vanguard Holdings will take the entire fall for the missing $15 million. And then we finally get to be together. Camille whispered, her voice dripping with lethal ambition. Without your annoying workaholic wife and without my boring, predictable husband, just you, me, and a massive fortune in the Cayman Islands. She is too stupid to see what is standing right in front of her. I sat in the dark bedroom listening to the two people I was supposed to trust most in the world mock my intelligence while finalizing the plot to end my life. I did not cry. I did not shake. The icy rage solidified. I pressed the wireless earpiece deeper into my ear, capturing every single sinister whisper floating up from my own kitchen. Downstairs, the clinking of coffee mugs had completely ceased, replaced by the low, hushed tones of two ruthless predators meticulously plotting their final kill. I activated the recording feature on the secure federal application, capturing the live audio and broadcasting it directly to the hidden surveillance vans. The $5 million life insurance policy became fully active at midnight. Darren said, his voice vibrating with dark, palpable excitement. I spoke with the underwriter this morning to confirm the activation. We are completely covered, Camille. If anything tragic happens to her now, the massive payout is absolutely guaranteed and completely incontestable. Good, Camille replied, her tone entirely devoid of human empathy. Because I cannot stomach playing the supportive sister-in-law for another grueling week. Friday night is the absolute perfect time, Darren. Your 10-year anniversary gala for the wealth management firm will have hundreds of high-profile witnesses. Everyone who is anyone in Atlanta society will be standing right there in that grand ballroom. Exactly, Darren agreed smoothly. The entire corporate community will see me doting on my beautiful, successful wife. They will see us holding hands and smiling brightly for the flashing cameras. When she suddenly collapses in the middle of the crowded ballroom, nobody will ever suspect foul play. They will simply assume the immense stress of running her software company finally caused a fatal medical emergency. It is the perfect airtight alibi. I secured the special package from my private contact down in Miami. Camille whispered, her voice dropping even lower. I strained to hear the chilling details of my own impending murder. It is an incredibly rare, highly concentrated synthetic sedative. It is completely odorless, completely tasteless, and virtually untraceable in any standard toxicology reports. It flawlessly mimics the exact physiological symptoms of a massive sudden cardiac arrest. Are you absolutely certain it will work quickly? Darren asked, his tone utterly clinical and completely detached. It works in less than 3 minutes, Camille assured him proudly. The exact moment she ingests the liquid, her heart rate will violently spike and then stop entirely. The emergency paramedics will not be able to revive her no matter how hard they try. I will keep the small glass vial carefully hidden inside my designer evening clutch. During the main dinner toast, when everyone is totally distracted by your grand speech, I will slip the sedative directly into her crystal champagne flute. You just have to make sure you hand her the correct poisoned glass. I will handle the champagne glasses myself, Darren promised confidently. I will make a beautiful tear-jerking toast to my devoted, supportive wife. We will lovingly clink our glasses and she will drink the entire thing. Then I will effortlessly play the devastated, heartbroken widower. I will cry endlessly in front of the local media cameras. My wealthy, influential clients will shower me with deep sympathy and blindly trust me even more with their investments. And then we finally run, Camille said, letting out a dark, excited laugh. You quickly collect the $5 million from the massive insurance claim. We instantly combine it with the $15 million currently sitting in her offshore Vanguard Holdings account. We leave David and your dead wife in the dust, and we immediately catch a private charter flight straight to the Cayman Islands. We will be totally untouchable, Darren. Untouchable, Darren echoed, pressing a heavy, passionate kiss against her lips. I love you, Camille. Just survive these next few mundane days. By Friday night, we will be completely free. The sheer audacity of their lethal scheme made my blood run icy cold. They discussed ending my life with the same casual tone one might use to order a coffee. Every word they spoke was a deliberate strike against the 10 years I had dedicated to building our life together. The reality of their deception was staggering. My own sister-in-law had sat at my dining table smiling warmly while secretly researching untraceable poisons. My husband had kissed my forehead knowing he had already signed my death warrant. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline wash away the lingering remnants of my grief. There was no longer any room for sorrow or hesitation. I carefully unhooked the tiny earpiece from my ear. My hands moved with precision as I prepared to contact federal authorities. The horrific audio feed went silent as Darren abruptly left the kitchen to finally log into his morning work meetings. I sat perfectly still on my bed, my entire body trembling with a mixture of profound terror and absolute vindication. I had everything. I had the complete motive, the exact method, and the confirmed timeline of my own planned execution. I reached for the encrypted federal smartphone Agent Davis had provided. I pressed the emergency broadcast button, transmitting the chilling audio file directly to his secure server. Less than 30 seconds later, the encrypted device buzzed violently in my hand. I answered the secure call, holding the phone tightly against my ear. Naomi, Agent Davis said, his deep voice tight with urgent, fierce adrenaline. We heard every single word of that conversation. The audio is crystal clear. We now possess the absolute smoking gun for felony conspiracy to commit murder, alongside the massive wire fraud and racketeering charges. The federal judge is signing the emergency arrest warrants right now. We have enough hard evidence to put them both away for the rest of their natural lives. We are moving in immediately. I have a heavily armed tactical team standing by just 3 blocks away from your current location. We will breach the front doors of your mansion in exactly 5 minutes. Get to a safe room and lock yourself inside until we secure the targets. Wait, I commanded sharply, my voice slicing through his frantic tactical instructions. I stood up from the bed, my bare feet sinking into the plush carpet. Do not breach this house, Agent Davis. Call off your tactical team right now. There was a stunned, heavy silence on the other end of the encrypted line. Naomi, you are in immediate lethal danger. Agent Davis argued, his professional composure slipping. He has a concrete plan to murder you. We cannot leave you inside that house with a man who actively intends to stop your heart. We are pulling you out today. I am not in any immediate danger. I countered, my tone dropping into a cold, calculated cadence. You heard the audio yourself. They are not going to make a single move until Friday night at the anniversary gala. They need the massive crowd of high society witnesses to solidify their perfect alibi. I am completely safe until the main champagne toast. I refuse to let you arrest him quietly in the privacy of his own home. Arresting him quietly at home is not enough, Agent Davis. It is nowhere near enough punishment for what he has done. He paused, clearly conflicted between his strict federal protocols and the undeniable truth of my strategic logic. What exactly are you proposing, Naomi? He asked cautiously. He has paraded his fake morality in front of all of Atlanta for a decade, I explained, pacing the length of my master bedroom. He stands at the pulpit of our church and preaches about honesty while stealing from his own congregation. He attends lavish charity events, using his pristine reputation to lure in new victims. He wants to use his anniversary gala to publicly humiliate my memory and play the grieving victim. I want to rip his mask off in front of the exact same people he has been robbing blind. I want the arrest to happen exactly where he planned to kill me, under the bright, glaring lights of his own magnificent gala. I want his wealthy clients to watch the federal agents place him in handcuffs. I want Camille to be dragged out of that luxurious ballroom in front of all her high society friends. I want my brother David to see the absolute truth with his own two eyes before she can spin a web of lies to protect herself. Naomi, this is a massive, unpredictable security risk, Agent Davis warned. You are asking us to coordinate a massive federal takedown inside a packed hotel ballroom. If Camille actually manages to slip that sedative into your drink and you consume it, we cannot save you. I will not drink the champagne I promised fiercely. I know exactly how she operates, and I know exactly when she plans to strike. I will control the entire narrative of the evening. Give me until Friday night, Agent Davis. Use these next few days to quietly freeze every single offshore account he controls. Lock down the Cayman Islands Trust so tightly that he cannot move a single penny when he realizes his plan has completely failed. I will deliver him to you on a silver platter. I heard a long, heavy sigh transmit through the encrypted speaker. You are the bravest, most terrifying woman I have ever met, Naomi. Fine. We will execute the takedown at the gala on Friday night, but we are increasing our surveillance. We will have undercover federal agents positioned as waiters and security staff throughout the entire venue. If we sense you are in imminent danger, we will breach the ballroom regardless of your plan. Understood, I replied coldly. Prepare the handcuffs. Friday will be spectacular. I ended the call with Agent Davis and set my next maneuver into motion. I needed to protect the only innocent blood caught in this web of deceit. I called my older brother David, asking him to meet me at a quiet coffee shop across town away from his treacherous wife. When he arrived, his familiar smile sent a sharp pang of guilt through my chest. He looked so happy, oblivious to the fact that his marriage was a meticulously constructed lie. Naomi, you look exhausted, he said, pulling me into a tight embrace. Is everything okay with you and Darren? Camille mentioned you two were going through a rough patch. Hearing her name made my stomach churn, but I forced a reassuring smile. We are working through it, I lied, taking a sip of coffee. I called you here because I need a massive favor, David. The 10-year anniversary gala for the firm is this Friday night. I have planned an elaborate surprise for Darren, and I desperately need you front and center for the reveal. David chuckled, his eyes crinkling with genuine sibling affection. You know I hate those stuffy corporate events, Naomi. Do I really have to wear a tuxedo? Yes, you do, I insisted, grasping his hands. I arranged for you to sit at the VIP table next to the main stage. You will have the absolute best view in the entire ballroom. But David, I need you to promise me something very specific. His jovial expression faded into deep brotherly concern. Anything, little sister. What is it? No matter what happens on stage Friday night, I need you to trust me completely, I said, dropping to an urgent whisper. Things might seem confusing for a moment, but promise me you will not intervene. You have to let the scene play out exactly as designed. Promise me, David. He stared at me, unsettled by the gravity of my request. I promised, Naomi, he agreed, giving my hands a reassuring squeeze. I will be right there in the front row. With my brother securely positioned, my next critical objective was financial. I drove to a secure location to meet Nana Josephine and Mr. Sterling. My grandmother explicitly instructed the terrified bank manager to meet us in the soundproof basement of her heavily gated estate, ensuring absolute privacy from Darren and his corrupt local connections. Mr. Sterling arrived, looking nervous, clutching a locked leather briefcase tightly against his chest. We sat around a large mahogany table covered in complex routing diagrams. Darren is planning to wire the stolen $15 million to the Cayman Islands on Friday night. During his grand speech, I explained, laying out the precise timeline extracted from the burner phone. He expects the transfer to clear instantly while the ballroom is completely distracted by my sudden death. Nana Josephine leaned forward, her sharp eyes gleaming with fierce tactical brilliance. "We cannot simply freeze the offshore trust account right now," she stated, tapping a manicured finger against the table. "If he logs into his secure portal and sees a frozen balance before the gala begins, he will know he is trapped. He will panic, cancel the public event, and attempt to flee the country immediately." "We need a digital dead man switch," I declared, looking directly at the sweating bank manager. "Can you program a delayed institutional lock on the Vanguard Holdings account?" Mr. Sterling wiped his brow, pulling a secure laptop from his briefcase. "Yes," he answered, his fingers flying rapidly across the keyboard. "I can embed a latent security protocol directly into the international routing sequence. The offshore account will appear completely normal and fully operational to anyone checking the balance. However, the exact moment he presses the button to initiate the $15 million wire transfer, the system will trigger an absolute hard lock. The funds will be permanently frozen in transit, suspended endlessly in a digital void. He will not be able to move a single penny." "Do it," Nana Josephine commanded, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "Lock the trap." I watched as Mr. Sterling coded the financial snare. Darren believed his stolen wealth was safe, heavily insulated by layers of offshore secrecy. He had no idea that the very banking infrastructure he relied on was now actively working against him. The moment he tried to steal my money and my life, he would effectively lock his own prison cell. The financial chokehold was firmly in place, but the public execution required meticulous staging. I returned to my corporate office, bypassing my personal assistants, and walked straight into the creative production department. As the founder and chief executive officer of the most successful public relations firm in Atlanta, I commanded a vast army of media professionals and highly skilled technical engineers. I intended to utilize every asset at my disposal to orchestrate my husband's absolute downfall. I called an emergency meeting with my audio-visual director and senior event coordinator. "Darren wants the 10-year anniversary gala to be the absolute event of the season," I announced, pacing the length of the modern glass-walled conference room. "We are going to ensure he gets exactly what he desires. I want maximum media coverage. Invite every prominent local journalist, every major news anchor, and every high society blogger in the entire metropolitan area. Tell them we are promising an unprecedented massive announcement regarding the future of his wealth management firm." My team took diligent notes, oblivious to the lethal reality behind my directives. I leaned over the table to emphasize the importance of my next instruction. "I have personally curated a surprise tribute video to honor his decade of incredible success. I am handling the sensitive media files myself. Therefore, our proprietary tech crew must maintain absolute total control over the entire audio-visual system at the St. Regis Hotel. I do not want the hotel staff touching a single microphone or projection screen. My team runs the soundboard exclusively." My lead audio-visual director nodded enthusiastically, completely eager to execute my ambitious vision. "We will seamlessly integrate our high-definition projectors with the ballroom massive display screens," he promised. "We will have flawless, crystal-clear audio coverage for the main toast." "Perfect," I replied, a cold, sharp smile pulling at the corners of my mouth. Darren was actively anticipating a glowing romantic tribute highlighting his fake morality and his fraudulent philanthropy. Instead, he was going to receive a high-definition, extremely public broadcast of his own devastating criminal confession. The stage was now perfectly set, and the spotlight was waiting. The final crucial element of my meticulous preparation was entirely psychological. For 10 agonizing years, Darren strictly controlled my public appearance. He aggressively insisted I wear muted conservative colors, pale blushes, soft creams, and quiet pastel blues. He wanted me to look like a soft, submissive accessory, blending seamlessly into the background while he commanded the primary attention. I drove my Range Rover straight to Phipps Plaza, marching purposefully into the most exclusive high-end designer boutique in the entire luxury shopping center. I completely bypassed the racks of soft conservative evening gowns and walked directly toward a stunning structural masterpiece hanging in the center display. It was a breathtaking floor-length silk gown featuring a plunging neckline and a dramatic sweeping train. The color was absolutely extraordinary. It was not a quiet, submissive blue or a gentle, passive cream. It was a striking, violent blood red, the deep, saturated color of raw, unrestrained power, the exact, vibrant color of ultimate rebirth. I purchased the incredibly expensive designer gown without a single moment of hesitation. When I returned to my opulent Buckhead mansion, I hung the blood-red dress prominently on the outside of my custom closet door. When Darren returned home from his client meetings and stepped into the master bedroom, he stopped dead in his tracks, staring openly at the vibrant, aggressive garment. "What exactly is that?" he asked, his dark eyes narrowing with clear, subtle disapproval. "You know I strongly prefer you in that soft pearl dress for major corporate events. Red is entirely too loud for you, Naomi. It draws far too much unnecessary attention." I turned to face him, plastering a perfectly sweet, adoring smile across my bruised face. I smoothly adjusted his expensive silk tie, playing the role of the devoted, foolish wife one last time. "It is a special occasion, darling," I purred softly, smoothing the lapels of his suit jacket. "I want to ensure that every single person in that grand ballroom is looking directly at me when you make your big toast." Darren fully relaxed, his arrogant signature smirk returning. He believed my vanity was playing directly into his murder plot. He wanted every single person watching when the poison finally stopped my beating heart. "It is absolutely perfect," he agreed, pulling me into a cold, calculated embrace. I smiled against his chest, knowing Friday will be an absolutely unforgettable night. Friday night finally arrived. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel was transformed into a breathtaking spectacle of opulent wealth and excess. Towering floral arrangements of flowers dominated the center of every table. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the polished dance floor, reflecting off the gold foil centerpieces that bore the insignia of my husband's elite wealth management firm. The massive room was absolutely packed with the most powerful and influential figures in the entire metropolitan area. Prominent local politicians, wealthy real estate developers, high society influencers, and the most respected leaders of the business community had all gathered to celebrate a decade of magnificent financial success. The valet line outside was a steady stream of luxury vehicles dropping off billionaires and socialites who eagerly walked into the meticulously crafted trap I had set. Darren was absolutely in his element, seamlessly working the crowded room like a seasoned politician. He looked striking in his tuxedo, perfectly tailored to highlight his broad shoulders and commanding physical presence. He moved from group to group, flashing that signature charismatic smile, clapping influential men on the back, and kissing the hands of their wealthy wives. He was the undisputed king of the evening, entirely oblivious to the fact that his magnificent kingdom was built on a crumbling foundation of lies and stolen capital. I walked closely by his side, playing the role of the doting, adoring wife with flawless precision. My red designer gown did exactly what I intended it to do. It drew every single eye in the grand ballroom the moment I stepped through the heavy double doors. I was a splash of color in a sea of muted elegance. Women stared in envy, while the men offered nods of deep admiration. Darren kept a firm, possessive hand resting on the small of my back, proudly showing me off as the ultimate trophy. I smiled radiantly up at him, resting my hand gently against his chest, pretending to be completely overwhelmed by his massive success. The physical contact made my skin crawl, but I swallowed the rising bile and maintained the illusion. I laughed at his jokes and nodded enthusiastically whenever he boasted about his market acquisitions. Across the crowded room near the champagne fountain, I spotted Camille. She looked dazzling in a green dress that hugged her curves tightly. Her hair was styled in an updo, and she wore a diamond necklace that I silently recognized as a piece purchased with stolen funds. David, my sweet, unsuspecting brother, stood proudly beside her, holding her hand and smiling broadly at the surrounding guests. I watched carefully as Camille made eye contact with Darren over the heads of the oblivious crowd. A secret, triumphant smirk flashed quickly across her lips, and Darren offered a nod in return. It was a silent, deadly communication confirming their sinister plan was fully in motion. They both believed they were merely hours away from inheriting a massive offshore fortune and escaping to a paradise. They thought I was a fool walking toward my own execution. The atmosphere inside the ballroom was suffocating heavy with a irony that only I could perceive. Every bright smile, every enthusiastic handshake, every joyful clink of a champagne glass carried a significance. I found myself making polite small talk with the very investors Darren was actively robbing blind. I stood face to face with Marcus Sterling, a retired surgeon who had entrusted his life savings to my husband. He smiled at me, raising his glass to toast our 10-year anniversary. Darren is a financial genius, Naomi the doctor praised, clapping my husband on the shoulder. He has doubled my retirement portfolio in just 3 years. You are an incredibly lucky woman to have a man who provides such security. I forced a smile, completely suppressing the urge to scream the horrifying truth. Thank you, doctor, I replied calmly. Darren certainly knows exactly how to secure a future. I looked around the ballroom, identifying victim after victim. There was Sarah Jenkins, a philanthropist whose charitable foundation was currently being siphoned dry to pay off earlier investors. There was Mayor Thomas, who had proudly endorsed Darren's firm, lending immense political credibility to a massive criminal enterprise. They were all drinking champagne and eating caviar funded directly by their own stolen capital. The sheer audacity of his deception was breathtaking. He stood right in front of them, soaking up their genuine praise while actively plotting to ruin all their financial lives right now. The burden of maintaining the facade was exhausting. I felt the heavy gaze of the undercover federal agents who were integrated into the event staff. I spotted Agent Davis as a senior catering manager standing near the kitchen exit. He offered no outward sign of recognition, but his presence was a constant grounding anchor. The 72-hour countdown was rapidly approaching its conclusion. My audio-visual team was securely positioned in the elevated tech booth overlooking the ballroom, controlling every microphone and projection screen in the massive venue. They were waiting patiently for my signal, completely unaware of the explosive evidence loaded into the queue. I navigated through the crowd, ensuring I spoke to as many people as possible. I wanted them to remember my face. I wanted them to remember my composure and my vibrant red dress. When the financial scandal broke tomorrow morning, I needed the public narrative to reflect that I was a woman who had been viciously deceived, not a weak complicit partner in his crimes. I positioned myself as the gracious host, thanking everyone for their continued support and highlighting the importance of transparency and trust in the business community. Darren beamed with pride, calling me his greatest asset while counting the minutes until my heart stopped beating. As the evening progressed, the general chatter grew louder and the music swelled. The hotel staff began directing guests toward their assigned tables for the main dinner service. I successfully guided my brother David toward the premier VIP table, located directly adjacent to the main stage. I squeezed his shoulder firmly, reminding him of the promise he made to me earlier in the week. He looked slightly confused by my intense grip, but nodded in agreement, taking his seat right in the front row. I needed him incredibly close to the action so he could witness the undeniable truth about his deceitful wife without any filters or excuses. Suddenly, the chandeliers began to slowly dim. A spotlight illuminated the center of the grand stage. The ambient noise in the ballroom faded into a silence. The moment we had all been waiting for had finally arrived. It was time for Darren to deliver his speech. This was the exact moment he planned to announce his new charity initiative. It sounded like a noble cause to the oblivious wealthy donors sitting in the audience, but I knew the dark reality. The charity was the Final Front, a sophisticated mechanism designed exclusively to move the remaining laundered money permanently offshore. It was his ultimate exit strategy, disguised as a community project. Darren kissed my cheek one final time before confidently striding up the short stairs to the polished stage. The crowd erupted into loud, enthusiastic applause. He approached the sleek, modern podium, adjusting the microphone with practiced ease. He looked out over the sea of wealthy faces basking in their absolute adoration. I remained standing near the front of the stage, positioning myself precisely where the spotlight caught the shimmering silk of my red gown. I kept my posture straight and my expression filled with manufactured awe. From the corner of my eye, I tracked Camille's movements with precision. As the heavy applause finally died down, and Darren began his smooth, charismatic opening remarks, she quietly slipped away from David's side. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, ensuring she did not draw any unnecessary attention from the captivated audience. She subtly navigated around the edge of the crowded tables, moving directly toward the secondary catering station, positioned near the VIP section. The station held dozens of pre-poured crystal flutes, filled with expensive vintage champagne, waiting for the celebratory toast that would conclude Darren's grand speech. My heart began to hammer relentlessly against my ribs, but I forced my breathing to remain slow and measured. The deadly trap was officially in motion. Camille was maneuvering into position to execute the final lethal step of their horrific conspiracy. She reached into her small designer clutch, her fingers searching for the tiny glass vial containing the untraceable synthetic sedative, the poison that was explicitly designed to stop my heart in less than 3 minutes. Darren continued his passionate speech, his deep voice resonating through the large ballroom speakers, speaking eloquently about trust, integrity, and the sacred bond of family. The juxtaposition of his inspiring words and his murderous intentions created a suffocating atmosphere of suspense. I watched Camille lean casually against the catering table, her body shielding her hands from the view of the guests. I knew the sequence of events that was supposed to follow. Darren would call me up to the stage. A waiter would bring a silver tray holding 2 champagne flutes. Darren would hand me the poisoned glass. I would drink it and I would die. But they had miscalculated. They assumed I was a passive victim waiting to be slaughtered. They had no idea that the woman in the red dress was no longer their prey. I was the orchestrator of their doom, and the final act was about to begin. I positioned myself near a massive mirrored pillar just a few feet from the main stage. The polished glass provided a perfect, uninterrupted view of the catering station directly behind me. I kept my eyes fixed on the reflection, watching Camille with predatory focus. The waitstaff buzzed around the tables, preparing for the final toast. A young waiter dressed in a crisp white uniform stood by the VIP station, holding a silver tray with 2 crystal champagne flutes perfectly isolated from the rest. Those were the designated glasses for Darren and me. Camille approached the waiter, flashing her signature pageant smile. I watched in the mirror as she leaned forward, pretending to stumble slightly against the heavy table. She reached out to steady herself, brushing her hand gently against the young man. "Oh, I am so incredibly sorry," she gasped, drawing his attention entirely toward her face. In that exact fraction of a second, her other hand moved with terrifying speed. She hovered her designer clutch directly over the silver tray. A tiny, clear drop of liquid fell from the hidden vial inside her bag, plunging straight into the champagne flute on the right side of the tray. The toxic substance vanished instantly, dissolving into the bubbling golden liquid without leaving a single physical trace. The waiter, completely oblivious to the lethal transaction, smiled politely and steadied the silver tray. "No harm done, ma'am," he replied, stepping back to his post. Camille offered him one last radiant smile before turning away. Her eyes locked onto the empty stage, burning with dark, triumphant anticipation. She had executed her part of the murder plot flawlessly. Now it was entirely up to Darren to deliver the fatal dose. On the grand stage, Darren adjusted the microphone, gripping the sides of the sleek podium. The bright spotlight illuminated his handsome face, highlighting the carefully practiced expression of deep humility and boundless gratitude. He looked out over the sea of wealthy investors and powerful politicians, soaking in their absolute admiration. 10 years ago, I started this wealth management firm with nothing but a bold vision and a relentless drive to succeed. He began, his deep voice echoing powerfully through the massive ballroom. We have built an incredible financial empire together, creating generational wealth and securing the futures of so many wonderful families in this beautiful city. The crowd erupted into loud, enthusiastic applause. Darren raised a hand, modestly urging them to settle down. But none of this monumental success would have been possible without the unwavering support of my rock, my foundation, and my greatest inspiration. He continued, his voice dropping into a sickeningly sweet, intimate cadence. He turned his gaze directly toward me, extending his open arm. "My beautiful, supportive wife, Naomi. Please, darling, come join me up here." The ballroom filled with deafening applause and joyful cheers. The bright spotlight swung away from the podium, illuminating my striking blood-red designer gown. I offered the wealthy audience a shy, radiant smile, lifting the heavy hem of my silk dress as I gracefully ascended the short stairs to the stage. Every single eye in the massive room was fixed firmly on me. I was walking directly into the lion den, bathed in glaring light and surrounded by hundreds of unwitting elite witnesses. Darren reached out and grasped my hand, pulling me close to his side. He wrapped his strong arm tightly around my waist, pressing a warm, gentle kiss against my temple. The intimate gesture made my skin crawl with absolute violent revulsion, but I maintained my flawless facade, leaning my head softly against his broad shoulder. "You look absolutely breathtaking tonight," he whispered quietly for my ears only. His tone was perfectly loving, but I could feel the rigid, tense energy vibrating through his entire physical body. He was buzzing with highly lethal anticipation. Right on cue, the young waiter approached the edge of the wooden stage carrying the polished silver tray. He carefully navigated up the short stairs, presenting the two crystal flutes directly to my husband. Darren reached out with heavily practiced elegance. He deliberately selected the glass on the right side of the tray, the exact flute Camille had covertly poisoned just moments ago. He held the tainted crystal delicately by the long stem, his movements completely smooth and entirely unhurried. Then he reached back and took the second untainted glass for himself. The young waiter bowed slightly and quickly retreated, leaving us standing alone under the bright, glaring spotlight. Darren turned to face me, his dark eyes gleaming with a malicious, suppressed excitement. He held the poisoned glass out toward me, offering it with a charming, loving smile. I reached out and took the cold crystal flute from his steady hand. The bubbling golden liquid looked perfectly normal, completely innocent, and incredibly deadly. I felt the heavy, crushing weight of the moment pressing down on my chest. I was physically holding my own predetermined death sentence. Darren turned back to face the captivated audience, raising his safe glass high into the air. My beloved friends, my esteemed corporate colleagues, and my cherished family. He projected his voice ringing with absolute public triumph. Tonight we celebrate an amazing decade of massive financial success and unbreakable community trust. But more importantly, we celebrate the profound sacred bond of holy marriage. He turned to look deeply into my eyes, flawlessly playing the demanding role of the devoted, adoring husband with sickening dramatic perfection. He raised his crystal glass slightly higher, locking his dark gaze with mine. "To my beautiful wife, my life, my everything." The massive crowd collectively raised their glasses, murmuring enthusiastic agreements and warm, heartfelt congratulations. The atmosphere in the Grand Hotel ballroom reached a suffocating peak of dramatic tension. Camille was watching me intently from the main floor, her eyes burning with dark, lethal expectation. David sat in the front row, smiling proudly at his brave sister. Agent Davis stood entirely frozen near the swinging kitchen doors, his rigid posture ready to violently breach the room. The entire ballroom was holding its collective breath, waiting for me to take the fatal sip. Darren smiled at me eagerly, waiting for the untraceable poison to physically touch my lips. But they had fundamentally miscalculated my quiet submission. I did not raise the lethal glass to my mouth. Instead, I smiled brilliantly, flashing a terrifying look of pure, unadulterated power directly into Darren's dark, calculating eyes. I slowly reached over to the sleek podium and picked up a small, heavy silver spoon resting near the microphone stand. I raised my poisoned glass high into the air and tapped the crystal flute with the heavy silver spoon. The sharp ringing chime echoed loudly through the massive ballroom speakers, slicing directly through the ambient celebratory noise of the crowded room. The joyful chatter instantly ceased, replaced by a sudden, absolute, deafening silence. Hundreds of wealthy, influential guests lowered their drinks, staring up at the brightly lit stage in deep, profound confusion. I stepped confidently up to the microphone stand, pulling the black microphone smoothly from its metal clip. Darren froze instantly, his charismatic smile slipping slightly as pure panic flared deep within his dark eyes. This specific action was entirely unscripted. This was absolutely not part of his meticulous murder plot. Thank you all for those beautiful warm wishes, I projected into the black microphone, my voice completely steady and ringing with absolute dominating authority. Darren speaks so incredibly eloquently about deep financial trust and the sacred bonds of family loyalty. He always knows exactly what to say to make everyone feel entirely secure and perfectly safe. But before we happily drink to our glorious future together, I strongly believe it is a devoted wife's solemn duty to ensure her beloved husband is always truly safe and fully protected from any unexpected harm. I turned to face Darren, completely locking my relentless gaze with his terrified, staring eyes. I stepped directly into his personal space, entirely eliminating the physical distance between our bodies. With a swift, smooth, and utterly unmistakable motion, I reached out and firmly grasped his safe glass. Before he could react to my sudden movement or pull his hand away, I effortlessly swapped our champagne flutes in front of the entire silent audience. I shoved the lethal poisoned glass directly into his sweaty right hand and forcefully took his clean, untainted drink completely for myself. Darren stared down at the highly toxic crystal flute currently trapped within his shaking, sweaty grip. His jaw dropped open, unable to process the brilliant, horrifying reversal of his meticulously crafted plan. The deadly weapon he designed exclusively for me was now resting firmly in his own palm. I raised my newly acquired safe glass high into the air, offering him a chilling, triumphant smile. "Drink up, my darling husband," I commanded sharply, my voice projecting flawlessly across the silent, breathless ballroom. "Drink to your massive financial success, your incredible loyalty, and your long, glorious future." Darren stood paralyzed under the glaring spotlight, his perfectly tailored tuxedo suddenly looking like a restrictive straitjacket. He stared down at the lethal champagne flute, trembling uncontrollably in his right hand. Small beads of condensation gathered rapidly on the crystal glass, perfectly mirroring the cold sweat breaking out across his tense forehead. He could not take a single sip. We both knew the transparent liquid swirling gently inside was explicitly designed to stop a human heart in less than 3 minutes. He opened his mouth to speak, but his usually silver tongue had completely abandoned him. He looked wildly around. He searched the grand ballroom, desperately looking for a plausible escape from the dangerous corner I had masterfully painted him into. He knew the liquid in his glass was entirely fatal. He knew I had outsmarted him completely. The predator was now the helpless prey caught within his own sinister trap. I did not give him the chance to construct a new lie or formulate another manipulation. I turned my attention back to the captivated audience, gripping the microphone with absolute unwavering authority. My voice echoed loudly through the massive speakers, easily cutting through the thick, suffocating tension inside today. "Darren talks so beautifully about lucrative investments and the sacred bonds of family," I announced, my tone dropping the cheerful facade and adopting a cold, razor-sharp edge. "He stands before you tonight, eagerly accepting your praise and happily drinking your champagne. But let us look at what my charming husband and my sweet sister-in-law have truly been investing in for the past 5 consecutive years." I raised my free hand high above my head and snapped my fingers sharply toward the elevated tech booth positioned at the very back of the dark, silent room immediately behind us. My dedicated audio-visual team executed the command flawlessly, precisely as we had previously rehearsed. The massive high-definition screens mounted directly behind the stage instantly flared to vibrant life. The elite audience had been eagerly anticipating a romantic, highly curated tribute video filled with perfectly filtered photographs of our 10-year marriage. Instead, the colossal glowing monitors blasted a staggering array of highly classified financial documents. The stark black and white spreadsheets illuminated the dark ballroom with absolute blinding clarity. The first dramatic image was a direct screenshot of the Vanguard Holdings corporate charter bearing the official registry seals. The next detailed slide transitioned seamlessly to the forensic accounting trails Nana Josephine had meticulously compiled. Thick red lines explicitly connected the massive deposits from Darren's elite wealth management firm directly to the offshore shell accounts and heavily through the fraudulent beauty salon corporate fronts. I watched the familiar faces of the wealthiest citizens in Atlanta morph from mild confusion to absolute raw horror. I had explicitly instructed my technical team to significantly enlarge the specific banking transaction logs. The large screens began scrolling automatically through a rapid-fire alphabetical list of every defrauded investor sitting right inside here today. Mayor Thomas dropped his expensive crystal glass onto the marble floor, watching it shatter into pieces when his personal retirement portfolio flashed on the massive display showing a zero balance. Sarah Jenkins gasped audibly, pressing her trembling hands tightly over her mouth as the charitable foundation accounts she managed appeared completely drained. The undeniable, irrefutable evidence of a $15 million Ponzi scheme played out in brilliant high-definition resolution for the entire elite society to witness tonight, destroying his perfect reputation entirely. The quiet murmurs of the stunned crowd quickly escalated into a rising tide of angry, loud shouts. People were rapidly pulling out their smartphones, frantically trying to log into their private banking portals, only to find the horrific truth officially confirmed. Darren tried desperately to step in front of the large screens, waving his arms frantically. "Turn it off!" he bellowed loudly, his voice cracking with intense, visible desperation. "It is a complete lie. She is having a severe mental breakdown. This is a malicious cyber attack by a jealous competitor." But his pathetic attempts to regain control were utterly futile. The forensic paper trail kept continuously scrolling, highlighting the fake vendor invoices and absolute lies. The money laundering operations running directly through Camille's high-end beauty salons exposed every single financial lie to the incredibly furious public. The massive room quickly erupted in chaotic gasps and furious angry shouts, but the absolute rising pandemonium was suddenly and forcefully silenced. A crystal-clear, highly amplified audio recording abruptly echoed through the state-of-the-art ballroom speakers, easily overriding every other loud sound in the spacious venue. The distinct, unmistakable voices of Darren and Camille suddenly filled the grand space, echoing harshly off the massive crystal chandeliers above. The $5 million life insurance started playing. The policy became fully active at midnight. Darren's recorded voice boomed from the large speakers, vibrating with dark, sinister excitement. If anything tragic happens to her now, the massive payout is absolutely guaranteed and completely incontestable. Then Camille's recorded voice followed immediately, dripping with lethal ambition and toxic, burning hatred. "During the main dinner toast, when everyone is totally distracted by your grand speech, I will slip the sedative directly into her crystal champagne flute." The recording of Camille continued smoothly. "The exact moment she ingests the liquid, her heart rate will violently spike and then stop entirely tonight. Yes, we will be totally untouchable, Darren." The recording kept continuously broadcasting their entire chilling murder plot to the utterly horrified audience. Every twisted joke about my naivety, every disgusting detail of their illicit hotel rendezvous, and their meticulously planned escape to the Cayman Islands played flawlessly over the pristine sound system. The undeniable, absolute proof of their vile conspiracy to commit murder washed over the captive crowd like a freezing, destructive tidal wave. The deafening silence that followed the shocking audio broadcast was significantly heavier and much more terrifying than the previous angry shouting. It was the collective shock. Hundreds of people realizing the terrible truth. They had been happily dining with a ruthless monster who was actively plotting a brutal assassination in the very same room. The absolute pandemonium broke out with explosive, unstoppable, violent force. In the front row, VIP section, my brother David stood up so violently his heavy wooden chair crashed backward onto the polished marble floor. His face was a tragic mask of pure, unadulterated agony and utter, complete disbelief. He stared in absolute horrifying shock at the woman he had unconditionally loved, supported, and faithfully married. Camille had completely lost all composure today. Her perfectly styled hair seemed to unravel slightly as she desperately tried to nervously back away from her furious advancing husband toward the nearest service exit. David quickly lunged forward, grabbing her wrist firmly before she could escape into the dark, hidden shadows of the room. "How could you?" he roared loudly, his voice tearing violently through the ambient chaos of the screaming investors. "How could you sleep with him and carefully plan to kill my own sister?" Camille stammered frantically, desperately trying to pull away from his fierce, tightening grip, her eyes darting wildly around the room, looking frantically. She searched for any possible viable avenue of escape. She was trapped, entirely surrounded by the very society she had relentlessly tried to manipulate and eagerly steal from. The wealthy guests who had praised her beauty salons moments ago now looked at her with pure, unhidden, absolute disgust, recognizing her as a willing accomplice to a brutal, premeditated murder plot against her own family. On the stage, Darren's carefully constructed mask entirely shattered into a million irreparable tiny pieces. The suave, charismatic wealth manager evaporated into thin air completely. He left behind a cornered, vicious animal who finally realized everything. His vast wealth, his pristine reputation, and his cherished freedom were completely incinerated in a matter of minutes. His dark eyes locked onto me, burning with pure, unrestrained violence and blazing intense hatred. "Cut the power," he screamed at the top of his lungs, wildly gesturing toward the invisible hotel security staff. "Cut the power to the screens right now. Someone turn off that audio immediately before I sue this entire hotel." When the massive screens continued to blindly blast his criminal ledger, Darren completely snapped, losing every last ounce of his remaining sanity. He dropped the poisoned champagne. He let the lethal liquid shatter and spill across the polished wooden stage, forming a toxic puddle at his designer leather shoes. With a primal, furious roar, he lunged directly at me, his large hands outstretched like jagged claws, aiming straight for my vulnerable throat. He intended to silence me himself, to finish the violent job right there. I did not flinch or take a single step backward. I stood my ground in my striking blood-red gown. Just as his fingers grazed the air near my neck, the heavy oak ballroom doors burst open with a massive, deafening crash. "FBI, get down on the ground now." Dozens of federal agents in full tactical gear swarmed the grand ballroom, pouring through the exits. The deafening crash of the heavy oak doors hitting the walls temporarily froze Darren in his tracks. Agent Davis led the charge, his weapon drawn, his voice booming over the chaotic screams of the panicked guests. Darren did not have the chance to lower his hands from my throat before two federal agents tackled him violently to the wooden stage. The heavy impact knocked the breath from his lungs. They shoved his face hard against the toxic puddle of spilled poisoned champagne, pinning his arms behind his back. The cold steel handcuffs clicked sharply around his wrists, securing the very hands that had struck me just a few nights prior. Down on the main floor, Camille shrieked as she tried to claw her way through the retreating crowd. She was completely trapped. Agent Davis grabbed her roughly by the shoulder, spinning her around and forcing her down onto the marble floor. Her expensive designer dress ripped along the seam, and her perfectly styled hair fell wildly across her face as the agent secured her wrists. Simultaneously, the bright, blinding flashes of professional cameras illuminated the chaotic ballroom like lightning strikes. I had explicitly instructed my public relations team to invite every major news anchor and investigative journalist in the metropolitan area. They had been waiting eagerly in the lobby, anticipating a massive corporate announcement. Instead, my team ushered them straight into the ballroom at the exact moment the federal raid began. The local media captured every single humiliating second of the downfall. Darren squirmed pathetically on the stage, his tuxedo covered in champagne and dirt. Camille wept hysterically on the floor, pleading desperately with my brother David, who turned his back and walked away from her without saying a single word. I stood tall and completely untouched in my blood-red gown, watching the authorities drag my abusive husband out of the venue and into the flashing red and blue lights waiting outside. The monster was finally caged. The ensuing months played out like a rapid, fast-forward montage of absolute justice and meticulous legal retribution. The irrefutable mountain of forensic evidence Nana Josephine and I had handed over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation made a lengthy trial completely unnecessary. Darren faced an insurmountable wall of federal charges. Under the strict guidelines of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, the federal judge showed him absolutely no mercy. My former husband received a 25-year federal prison sentence without any possibility of parole. He traded his luxurious Buckhead mansion and tailored suits for a concrete cell and a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. His vast network of corrupt local politicians and wealthy golf buddies completely abandoned him, terrified that their own illicit financial dealings might be exposed if they offered him any support. Camille faced an equally devastating and highly public reckoning. The undeniable audio recording of her plotting to poison my champagne secured her fate. She was swiftly sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit murder and aggressive money laundering. My brother David filed for divorce the very next morning, legally stripping her of all marital assets. The family court judge immediately revoked her maternal custody rights, ensuring she could no longer poison the minds of her young children. David took full custody, stepping up as a fierce protective father while completely cutting his toxic former wife out of their lives forever. As for the massive web of defrauded investors, the financial bloodbath was completely averted. Because Nana Josephine and Mr. Sterling had brilliantly executed the delayed institutional lock on the offshore accounts, the stolen $15 million never reached the Cayman Islands. The funds remained permanently frozen in a digital void until the federal authorities officially seized them. Every single dollar was meticulously tracked and fully restored to the original investors. The retired surgeons, the local philanthropists, and the church leaders received their hard-earned savings back in full. My grandmother, forensic genius, had prevented a catastrophic economic collapse within our community. Exactly 1 year later, I stood proudly on the expansive glass balcony of my public relations firm, brand new high-rise office. The warm Atlanta sun bathed the skyline in a vibrant golden glow. The air felt incredibly fresh and entirely devoid of the suffocating control I had endured for a decade. The dramatic events of that fateful Friday night had not destroyed my career. They had propelled it to unprecedented heights. Because I had flawlessly controlled the chaotic narrative of my horrific personal crisis, my firm gained massive international recognition. I demonstrated an unparalleled ability to orchestrate complex crisis management under lethal pressure. We were now officially the most sought-after and highly respected public relations agency in the entire American South. Corporations and elite figures flocked to our doors begging for our strategic representation. I turned away from the breathtaking city view and walked back into my spacious corner office. Nana Josephine sat comfortably on a plush cream sofa reviewing a quarterly financial report with her signature sharp focus. She looked up and smiled proudly, her eyes crinkling with genuine warmth and absolute victory. I picked up 2 delicate porcelain teacups from the sleek, modern coffee table and handed one to the woman who had helped me burn a criminal empire to the ground. We gently clinked our teacups together, the soft chime ringing with the sweet, beautiful sound of absolute freedom. We had faced the darkest manipulation imaginable and emerged completely victorious. Sometimes the slap that was meant to break you is exactly what you needed to wake up. Never let anyone trap you in a picture-perfect lie. If you have ever had to tear down your own life to rebuild it on your own terms, drop a comment below. Like and subscribe to join a community